National Opera Center, those who are with us in the Opera Center itself, and those who are seeing us on our live stream, welcome everyone. This is our conversation with the great bass-baritone Greer Grimsley, and as many of you know, our conversations focus on the careers of important artists through a lens of career development. How did they get their start? How did they master the artistry and the technique of being a great opera singer? So I have lots of questions for Greer, but first I just want to give a sampling of some of the reviews that I was reading earlier today. In the Dallas News, Greer Grimsley was a Dutchman of dreams, a spookily powerful presence, paradoxically powerless, dispensing a gloriously leathery bass baritone. As Wotan, bass-baritone Greer Grimsley was a swaggering captain of industry, singing with forceful dark powers. He was suave and commanding of voice. And it goes on about his performances as Amonasro, his performance as Sweeney Todd, as in Tristan and Isolde as Kurwenal. Just review after review praising the artistry and the vocal splendor of Greer Grimsley. He's been doing this for quite a while. And although he plays some of the darkest and most menacing characters in opera, he's a man of great warmth, sense of humor, and he even does comedy. So please welcome Greer Grimsley to the stage of the Opera Center. Greer. Welcome. So good to see you. Please. I've had the pleasure of knowing Greer for many, many years when
yes.
I had hair and yours was dark.
Yes.
But you still have yours so beautifully. As you know, I always start my interviews with the question of, who brought you to your first opera?
Well, I brought myself in a weird way. I was fascinated with theater and music in high school, and I didn't see my first opera till I was a junior in high school. And they called my drama club, and the New Orleans, where I grew up, the New Orleans Opera was doing an opera, and they wanted to know if any of us in the drama club wanted to be extras. And we were thinking about it, and then they said, well, we'll pay you $10. And we went, okay. So we went down, and oddly enough, it was a very historic set of performances because it was Richard Tucker performing the role of La Juive. And I believe it was the only time that he ever performed that role in the United States.
Yes.
And it was an eye-opening experience, and I think that's when I started thinking about opera. Up until that point, I was a music theater guy. Mm-hmm. I thought that would be a nice thing to do, but seriously thinking about majoring in archaeology as I was headed towards college, and that was my first experience with opera.
And how great to see Richard Tucker. I think that was actually his last stage production of his life. I think he passed away very soon after that.
Okay, I think so.
Well, how wonderful. Now, I'm always fascinated. You talk about being in high school, and certainly in our research about the careers of opera singers, it's frequently the high school choral teacher or the high school music teacher who first realizes that a young singer has a real voice. Was that the case for you, that it was a high school choral teacher or music teacher who said to you, you've got something going there?
You're absolutely right. And Mr. Cunningham, my choral conductor, teacher, heard me singing in one of the musicals and said, we need basses, and I think you have a good voice. And up until that point, I was playing trumpet in the band, and that sounded interesting to me. And so I pursued that. And that's how I got into the sort of more classical side of it.
You have this incredible speaking voice. When you were in high school, did your voice kind of appear naturally? Did this sound just come out of you?
Yes. I mean, that was the bane of my young singer existence, is that people didn't believe that this,
Yeah.
you know, how I produced my sound happened.
Yeah.
You know, it was, and I needed physically to grow into what this sounded like. Because in high school, I was mostly feet and nose. You know.
A background family involved with music at all?
Nothing.
Or with natural voices?
My dad had a very sort of deep and present voice, very commanding voice. And he played the guitar and occasionally would sing along, but nothing, you know, he would never really sort of belt out, you know, he'd just sort of lightly sing along.
So there you're sort of interested in music theater, you go and you're an extra in La Juive.
Yes.
And a light bulb goes off and you say, wait, there's a sound here.
Well, I mean, I sort of figured out, okay, I can sing, I know that. And at the time that I was growing up, there were a lot of, I was also, in the 70s, I am a child of the 70s, and at that point, I was listening to everything. And musicals, rock, and so I knew just by singing along with the songs of Black Sabbath that I liked at the time, that something didn't sound right, you know. And also, when I hit my senior year and I was in choir, a very dear friend and my first voice teacher, Anthony Lashura.
Really?
Yes, yes. Those of you who know Anthony, from hopefully more from more things than Boardwalk Empire. But he said, you know, he said, I think you could sing opera, and he was the one that sort of planted that idea. I mean, I was headed to looking for artifacts in a pit someplace, you know. I was, and it still is a hobby, somewhat of mine, and I love history. But he was the one that said, hey, you know, let's do a few lessons along the way, and then he encouraged me to audition for Loyola, in which I did, and I was accepted, and that's pretty much put me on that path. At that point, I didn't vary so much. I mean, I took respites to make money along the way, as everybody did, but that was thanks to Anthony, and he sort of pointed me in that direction.
How fabulous! That's a great connection.
Yeah,
great connection.
And every time I see him, I say, "You're responsible for my life." Yes,
I'm sure he's very proud of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as I read the various bios of you that are on the website, lots of times when I interview singers, there's a list of competition wins and young artist programs. And I didn't see that. And either it's because your credits of singing Wotan around the world are so long, or that in fact you didn't go that route of the competitions and the young artist programs. Did you do any of that?
Well, that's a very good question. And what the joke, I mean, there are all these voice category jokes about light bulbs. Screwing in light bulbs. And the one about bass baritones or baritones is like, how many bass baritones does it take to screw in a light bulb? Who cares? And so as far as competitions are concerned, there's not, for young bass baritones, there's not the repertoire, the competition winning repertoire.
Right.
And I did enter them and was quite frustrated a lot of the times. I did, there were three of us, myself, Kim Josephson, and there was another fellow that we all tied for first place. The only one that I won, or that we all three won, was the Bruce Yarnell competition. And then I was in the Houston Opera Studio for 3 years.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Okay, so did not win competitions.
And it was, it is a strange beast.
But that didn't discourage you, and you.
No, not at all. because I understood that competitions are completely outside of the realm of what happens on the stage in an opera, or or anything else that you do. That it is this frozen moment of whatever you do, and it is part of opera, but it is something else.
I think that's an incredibly important statement, that
Yeah.
competitions are not opera on stage.
Yeah.
And in fact, we know plenty of singers who have huge competition careers, but it doesn't go on from there, that's what they were good at.
Yeah.
And other singers who didn't necessarily do well in competitions, but have great careers.
Yes.
Fascinating. So Texas Opera Theater, but you also did touring with Texas Opera Theater.
Yes.
So you were
Yeah.
part of the Houston Opera Studio. Was this concurrently or sequentially Texas Opera Theater
It
and
was,
studio?
let's see, I was in the Houston Opera. I ended up living in Houston for 6 years. So I was in the Houston Opera Studio for 3 years, and it was my 6th year that I sang with the Texas Opera Theater. So I had 2 years where I was sort of fending for myself, and there was 1 year that I had nothing but Hansel and Gretel's, and I was doing the father in that, and you do what you do, and then I would work with a friend of mine when I'd come home and make some money, and then go out and do another Hansel and Gretel.
And what many in the audience or online or on the live stream won't necessarily know is that in those years, and we are the same age, so we're the same vintage, that there was the Western Opera Theater out of San Francisco,
Yes, yeah.
Texas Opera Theater out of Houston, and the New York City Opera National Company. And there were these companies that toured 20, 30 cities in a 5-week, 6-week period. They went from city to city to city. It was grueling.
Yeah.
But I worked for the New York City Opera National Company in my first job at City Opera, and Jerry Hadley was the Alfredo in
Oh my gosh,
700
okay.
Traviatas that we did that year.
Yeah.
And the touring experience, it doesn't exist anymore. None of these companies exist because touring is so expensive and moving opera isn't easy.
No.
But what did it give you? What did the touring experience give you?
Well, number one, I met the love of my life with Texas Opera Theater, and
Yep.
we were both doing our first Carmens, Loretta Bivey, and I hope she's listening. And other less importantly, I learned what I could do in the face of not ideal situations. And I'm a fairly easygoing person to begin with, but as you know, in those touring situations, you show up at a theater and it's a different theater every 2 or 3 days. And you have to make all these adjustments, and sometimes part of the set doesn't fit, and you have to change the staging, and you've spent 6 hours on the bus, to get there, and then you toss your bags in the hotel room, and then go grab something to eat, and then you're at the theater.
Yeah.
I guess it toughens you, and also what you can do. There's a certain amount of confidence that I believe comes, and you hours logged in on the stage are hours logged in on the stage. It doesn't, and those tours were so very important for us, mining our craft, and we would find things there to use. It was a great way to practice what we do as young singers, and along with you, I wish that we did have those around, because it would give a bigger. I think the pressure for young singers nowadays is so great, because if you don't get into one of these programs, this is from my point of view, that there's not much place for you to ply your craft.
Right.
And it's very important, I think, as we take care of our young singers, that those opportunities are available, not just in opera houses. There is something about touring, I think, that is special and is a natural part of what we do.
And I found it to be, it created great patriotism in me as you go to these small cities that would never support
Yes.
an opera company of their own.
Yeah.
And in the auditorium, whatever they have, you do a performance, and lo and behold, people show up, and
Yeah.
you do an opera for them that night. It's really
Yes.
quite a wonderful experience.
Yeah. I mean, shout out to one of my favorite cities like that when I was doing Hansel and Gretel is Bassett, Nebraska.
Wow.
Up there near the border of South Dakota.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how welcoming and how warm the community was when I still remember this. We had the children in the show, local children in the show. So that was also part of it. And as you said, you can't help but become patriotic. You can't help but love this country and the people in it by doing it. And you meet all kinds of people along the way, colleagues, patrons along the way, and
Wives. We'll
Yes.
talk about that
Yes.
in a little while. And you did Father in Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah.
Escamillo.
Yes.
Any other roles on touring?
Falca in Fledermaus.
Really?
Yeah. That was the second opera on Texas Opera Theater.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
the Escamillo stuck with you as a role.
Yes, it did.
Falca, not as much.
No.
Which gets us to the question of repertoire. And I was curious to know how you found your repertoire that we know you so well for, or how your repertoire found you.
That's a good question, Mark. I would have to say people saw it before I did, but I also, it does feel that it did find me eventually, and I found it, and it was for me it felt like a long process.
Were you in your 20s when someone said to you, you should sing Wotan?
No.
Okay.
No. People, I know a lot of singers who ended up singing Wagner that people didn't know what to do with them.
Right.
And they spent a lot of years being frustrated, trying to figure out what should I do. And that's also part of the process of being, of the artist that we're always becoming, is not trying to, as I say, teach to the test, or trying to please. It's what is here and what's true for you, and that process can be a frustrating process. I had spent. I learned when I was learning to sing. I learned classic bel canto technique. I loved to sing Verdi, and when I was auditioning, I would sing Verdi and wouldn't get hired for Verdi. It was very frustrating. And then once I started singing the German repertoire, then I'd have intendants come to me and ask me, "Do you sing Verdi?" So, it's just, it sort of happens when it happens. And the idea that, giving up the idea that I'm going to teach someone what I can do. Mm-hmm. And if the person's listening, the person listening either hears what I can do or can't hear what I can do from what I just did. And either I'm not clear enough about it, or they just don't get it. And one of the best bits of advice from an ex-agent of mine who God rest his soul, Joe Block, he said, you don't waste your time on the people who don't get you. And that was important advice. And it's knowing when to move away from a role like Escamillo, which I had a great amount of success with, and over 100 performances, well over 100 performances, maybe closer to 200 performances, and I think the same for Loretta. But into something else as I'm growing, and that's you have your trusted people that you will listen to. But it was we were on tour with Peter Brooks Carmen, and we were in Glasgow. And I tell this story because that's how I sort of got into this repertoire, And some friends of mine, friends of ours, were going to sing for Scottish Opera while we were there. So we called up our agents and said, you know, I'd like to sing for them. And I did sing for them. I sang my usual stuff. I sang Escamillo. And they came back with an offer for John the Baptist. Huh. And that was my first John the Baptist.
It's funny how dissimilar those are in
exactly.
a way.
Exactly. And so you never know. And in a sense, it did find me. But I was also a victim of a certain amount of American conservatism about when you should start looking at things.
Right.
And so I thought, oh, no, I shouldn't, I really shouldn't do this. And it was Loretta saying, this is like, what else have you got? You may as well take it. And that was a moment where I say, that's where I mark the moment where I went, okay, that's where I started to move into the German repertoire.
Isn't that interesting?
And because I was so, I was being pushed in all these directions, lyric baritone, regular baritone, sometimes some Italian stuff, French stuff, and then I started working on the Salome, and I found what I felt when I was first singing. And it was that I still had this connection to the lower part of my voice and the upper part of my voice, and I could use that. I could use them all. And it was a fantastic acting part. And and I just went, okay, I think I'm on a road now that will be fruitful.
How wonderful. And who was the casting director or the general director who offered you the John the Baptist? Do you remember?
It was the conductor, John Malcheri.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And he heard it, and he was right.
Yeah.
Now, you've become identified with a number of roles, and of course, Dutchman and Wotan. And to be identified with roles means that you've done them a lot.
Yes.
You've done them season after season after season. And when you have signature roles and you've done them a lot, how do you keep them fresh?
As simple as it sounds, when I'm brushing it up before I go do it, if I've not done it right before, I look at I look through the music, and as trite as it sounds, there are so many things that these characters say for the first time out loud. And it's trying to remember what that was like here, saying something for the first time. Just saying it out loud for the first time. And always looking for something new in it. I remember reading before I did my first Scarpia and Tosca, I read Tito Gobbi's book, and he said that in all of his performances of Tosca, he always found something new. And that was something that really resonated with me. And no matter what I'm doing, I am always looking for something new, something that I can pull out, something that's maybe more relevant to me now than I was before. But there is something, I always look for something. I don't think I ever have just kind of said, okay, this is my name whatever role, and this is what I do. And because different productions are so different. I try to understand where the conductor's coming from with his interpretation and what the director is doing, and try to meld that with how I feel about the role. And so keeping it fresh is always, it can not just with saying text, but also musical things. Is there something that I haven't, thinking about why did the composer write these many measures of rest between my answer to a question? It's constantly asking questions of myself.
Does it happen frequently that the new insight into the role is given to you by a conductor or a colleague or a stage director, or does it come from within you?
I think a combination of all of those, and it's being open to those, and I think that's the thing that it's important as we grow as artists to remain supple. And I love that word because it can describe singing, and it can also describe your thinking. And you can't be so rigid, because it's about, as we talked about with touring as well, anywhere you go, it's about being able to adapt. And sort of like harken back to my interest in history and archaeology and anthropology, is that that's how our species survived. It's adapting. It's being able to adapt to all these different situations. And why shouldn't we? And because you never know when that spark will happen. When that question will happen that you went, oh, okay, I see.
Or if the Brunhilde sees it a way you've never thought of, that may
Yes.
get you to think it differently.
Exactly.
How long, you're doing Wotan right now, how long was it between your last ring cycle and this one?
Let's see. Oh gosh, now I'm trying to remember. Because I've done ring operas along the way.
As in Die Walküre in Bayreuth last summer.
Yes.
There.
Yeah. Oh, baby. That was quite fun.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that.
It has been, I think we finished, well, we didn't do them as a cycle, but we finished in Tokyo. It's been like a year and a half, 2 years.
So with a year and a half or 2 years between ring cycles, of course you know it.
Yeah.
But do you really sit down at the piano and relearn it, if you will, after a year and a half pause? What's that like to refresh a ring cycle?
Well, you start one opera at a time, for sure. It's like meeting an old friend. It's something very familiar, something really, and I welcome it every time. And especially at this part of my career too, is that as a young singer, even if you had done roles before, at least for me, I would always sort of like go into the anxiety of remembering the first time I did it, and feel that anxiety. And that's not so much. It's more of a welcoming process, and I'm always surprised how much of it stays remembered. Especially the nuances throughout.
So let's say you are working with a stage director, and given the repertoire, there are stage directors who will interpret it radically differently from the last production or the production before then. What happens when you encounter a situation and you just don't see the work that way? Do you just take a deep breath and, as we all do in a job, think, okay, it's a job? Or do you try to make it work for you? How do you deal with the productions that don't quite see it the same way that you do?
I will try something and try to make it work. And if I can't make it work, then I bring it back to the director. And more often than not, they've been willing to discuss it, to change some things, but there have been a few of them where you have to take a deep breath, and you try to infuse it with as much truth and beauty of the story that you can within those confines. Because I think being honest on stage, anyone, no audience in the world, there's not an audience member in the world that can't tell when someone's not connected and true and saying, yeah. I mean, immediately when somebody's just kind of going through it and they hate the production, it's not, number one, you're not, if you don't like the production and you want people to see that how much you don't like
Right.
how much the production really is bad,
Yeah.
then you invest in as much of the mania that the director wants you to invest in. But I think it's also a good exercise, not just an exercise, but it keeps you fresh. And for me, I'm always trying to think, okay, this is kind of crazy, but how can I justify this? How can I make this work? And it keeps, as an important word, it keeps you supple. It keeps you, and you cannot become rigid. I mean, I worked with a colleague, we were doing a crazy production, and the whole time she would just roll her eyes to the audience. You know, and you just go, it's like we're doing something here.
Not in the rehearsal hall, but to the audience.
No, in the performance.
Wow.
It was like she was like, "Isn't this terrible?" You know, it's like,
yeah, that's not going to work.
no. And I feel that's not. I want people to come and make a judgment on their own. Perhaps I can't see because we are, as singers, we're playing our instruments from the inside. You know, there's no, you can't put your hands on it. And also as an actor, you're playing your instrument from the inside. You know how your body moves, but motivating that, and so you can't see what that looks like. And granted, if it's crazy production, you can't say to the person who's put that together, what does that look like? You know, there's the trust value, and that's a big part of performance too. Is the trust of your colleagues, of the people, of the team putting it together, and that's it all sort of, it's, you know what? But that's part of, I think that's part of being or surviving a career, is being able to weave through these things, these challenges. And yeah, sometimes it's not so gratifying, but you know,
Lots
there
of
may
times
be,
it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And more often than not,
Yeah.
I would say 95% of the time, even more than that, it's just wonderfully gratifying.
Vocal role model?
Oh my gosh. Well, once I discovered him, George London, not to imitate, but just, you know, to hear and adore how he interpreted music.
Yeah.
I would say Robert Merrill, Cornell McNeil, Norman Traegle, another New Orleans boy.
Right.
Yeah, he was, you know, all of those guys that I admire, and they, you know, they sang healthily for a long time.
They did.
My gosh, Cornell McNeil had a huge span in his career, as did Merrill.
Merrill, sure.
Yeah.
So why do Wotans like singing Sweeney Todd?
Yes, you know, I never thought about that until you asked that. I'll tell you my reason.
Okay.
All right, and maybe we can match it up with some of the other guys like Bryn. And, is that, and I think singers will say this too. I like, and I wanted to be a music theater guy, but you know, I'm more suited for opera in the long run, but it's still a passion of mine. I adore Sondheim, but the challenge of it, because it is very operatic in many respects, and it's nice. My main point is that it's nice not to have to be confined to a time signature when you're doing your dialogue, and it's anything that you're able to do dialogue, I love doing, because you're exploring the music of the language as opposed to music imposed on the language. And as an actor, it's nice to have that every once in a while too.
It's just I love the concept you just spun out. That's really fabulous.
Yeah.
Pirates of Penzance.
Yes.
So
yeah.
you do like doing comedy.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Because when I read the rep list, there's some pretty dark characters.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And are there other comic roles that you've done that you particularly enjoy, or comic roles you want to do?
Oh my gosh. So far, those are pretty good. I'm trying to think of any other comic roles. Early on in my career, I did the Red Shadow in Desert Song, and I thought that was fun because you sort of play a dual role of being a fool and then the hero, you know, and that was quite fun. But no. I mean, so far the ones that I've done have been really satisfying.
Or the Grinch.
Well, yes, you've heard that.
Yeah, I did this afternoon.
Yeah. I did that as a dare from a friend, and she said, "Oh, I think you would sing that so well." And so I put that together in an afternoon, just right at my piano. And I think when I first tossed it out there on Facebook, I challenged people. It was around Christmas time, so I wanted it to be a challenge for people to donate to Toys for Tots, and I sort of challenged people to do that.
It's really wonderful. I really enjoyed it this afternoon. So I want to lean into the conversation about you and family, because of course your wife Loretta is a singer, and so frequently dual singer relationships don't work over time. Either ego gets in the way, or just logistics triumph over love. And you two, for a nice long time now, have made it work. How did you make it work with two working singers, with careers, with egos and frailty? How did you make it work?
I think ultimately that we our relationship is the thing that our love for each other is the thing that is the most important. And there have been, I mean, it hasn't been, I mean, it's been tough. And as you said, because, you know, we're pulled apart in different directions, there are stresses along the way that I think the one thing that really gets you through, and I hate to sound trite about it, but it is our love for each other, and realizing that that's the most important, and being able to see past the problem, you know,
past the logistics.
Yeah, past the logistics, and you know, and realizing that, you know, it's a gift, and to find someone who loves you and that you love, to go through this crazy life. You know, that's, some people never find that.
Someone who really understands what the other one is going through.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that we never had to. There never was the having to explain the frustrations of a rehearsal or a. Not that is any great thing, but there is a huge empathy for each other about that, and there is something about, you know, having done tours together. I mean, we toured together from Texas Opera Theater, and then pretty much right after Texas Opera Theater, we were both hired. They didn't know that we were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time, and Peter Brook hired us to do his Carmen, and then we were on tour with that for many years, and that's you know, that showed us that we could sort of exist together and love each other through it all. And I you know, the wonderful part is, despite, you know, all of the bounces and and the bumps and the bruises that we've had through the time that we've been together, 30 plus years. I've always known that she was on my side and I was on her side, no matter what. And that's something special, and seeing how special that is.
And she is such a special person,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And then you went and had a child.
Yes.
So all this lovey-dovey stuff is fine, but then you had a child. And how, with the travel and the logistics, it's logistics times two. How did you make the child rearing work?
Well, when we were agonizing about if we should try for a baby, and then once we found out we were pregnant and started to stress about what are we going to do, exactly that question, I sort of hearkened back to our species as survivalists, and I said, from the time we as a species left Africa, we've been nomadic. It's in us to be nomadic, and even the Native Americans here, up until most recently, were nomads, pretty much, and everything just sort of came with. And I said, let's try to look at it that way, and she bought it. And but I thought, it wasn't without great. Loretta was always the person who thought about logistics, and and if it weren't for her parents too helping us out in so many places, they were fabulous. That was a big thing as well, and having the help of family along the way when Emma was very small. There were times that I would have Emma, but more often than not, Loretta had Emma. And whether or not you like it, as a female artist, you do take a hit in perception in this business once you've had a child. I don't understand it, but you definitely see that happen. And so she was busier than me, and that took a hit as well.
So when I see Emma, I should not bother asking her who brought her to her first opera, because it's undoubtedly her parents.
Yeah, we're responsible. Yeah.
And then there is the family Sweeney Todd, and I'd love you to tell us about that experience.
I think I had more fun than I should have had, and it was just I love the fact I got very teary and emotional that the three of us were sharing the stage.
What were the roles?
Well, I was singing Sweeney, and Loretta was singing Mrs. Lovett, and Emma played my child, my daughter. And
fabulous.
I came close to slicing her throat at the end. That was an amazing thing. I hope we get to do that again. And that's the thing with Loretta, and that performing with her, I know her so well, she knows me so well. There's so much trust there that we can explore those characters much further than it would be with any other colleague. And in having Emma, my interaction with her was just very brief at the end, but she trusted me, I trusted her, and I was very proud of us, I have to say. Just very, very plainly, I was very proud of us.
Were they able to be with you in Bayreuth last summer when you made your Bayreuth debut?
Loretta was with me, but Emma was on tour.
And what was it like after a career of substance to bring Wagner roles to Bayreuth?
Wow, yes. It was not a small thing. It was, I didn't think I would ever, I thought at this point that that would be the one milestone that I would not do. I came close. I auditioned. They came to see me in Berlin when I was singing Flying Dutchman and asked me to audition for their production of Flying Dutchman. At the time, I was hugely excited, asked my agent to set it up, they set it up, and then it got canceled, and then reset, and then we never heard, and then I asked, well, what's going on? Well, it just so happened that this fabulous, wonderful singer who was a staple of there, John Tomlinson, decided that he'd like to try the Dutchman, and I never got to do it when I auditioned. But you know what? I mean, things happen the way they happen, because I think I savored that moment of making my debut there so much more last summer. And and on top of it, I was honored to sing not one Wagner opera, but two Wagner operas for my debut in Bayreuth. It was not a small thing, and I still, I mean, when we talk about it, I still sort of glow a little bit, because I think of, the kid that grew up in a very poor neighborhood in New Orleans, and ending up singing at the pinnacle of Wagner's operas.
We were talking back in the green room. On the one hand, how hot it is in Bayreuth, and how hot it is to be under the spotlights and in costume and in multiple wigs. And then we both looked at one another and at the same time said, but the acoustics. And it somehow makes it all worthwhile. You were saying about the first moment you heard the orchestra in your Walküre and what it was like.
Oh, yes. Well, the two things I sang there were Flying Dutchman and Walküre. But my first stage rehearsal with orchestra was Walküre. But my official debut was Dutchman. But we were going through it, and came time for my first line, and I sang my first bit, and I was late for my second line because I was standing there with my mouth agape, and just marveling at the acoustic. I mean, it was just amazing. I wasn't prepared for what the beauty of the sound that rang in that the sweetness of the acoustic.
Well, composer, librettist, and architect, not bad. Now we got on the subject of children, and of course you've done a couple of residencies at New England Conservatory, and I wonder what is it like working with youngsters who are perhaps starry-eyed. What do you try to impart? Are you doing technique? Are you doing interpretation? Are you doing career reality checking? What do you do with the young people?
Probably a little bit of all of that, but I always try to I like to especially when it's young singers, talk about technique, because I think if you get ahead of the horse, because technique is the foundation, and you have to be so solid with your technique, then you can talk about interpretation. You have to be able to just sing it, just sing the doggone thing. Then through knowing, and when I say technique, when you learn a technique, you're also learning how your voice works. And you learn all of the different colors it can make, you learn and trying to make colors without having the technical basis under it is a fool's errand, I believe. And I think many times students, and it happened to me, that you are forced to make these colors or these interpretations that are not true to you. And the one thing I try to emphasize, aside from technique, is to find what they want to say with it. Tell me what you want to say with this piece. Where you as the artist, because I think the younger that we empower the singers to make those choices, to think about those, instead of waiting for somebody to tell them what the interpretation or what color they should use. It's exciting to see that light go on, to challenge them, to do as we were talking before about keeping roles fresh, is to ask them a question. What's happening here? Why are you singing this? Is this the first time that your character is singing this? Saying this out loud? Asking those questions. What's going on in their life? just even in a grander scale, what's going on in the world when this opera was composed. What was influencing that composer? You know, Verdi or Beethoven or Mozart, even Wagner. What was happening that caused these people to want to change people's hearts with their music? That's those questions, and I think, I mean, because these guys are adults. They're young, but they're adults, and they're able to work through these questions. But before you get to interpretation, you have to be sound in your technique.
We were talking back in the green room too about the importance of source material, and how when you want to refresh a role, you go back and read some other source material or historical work, just so that way you recontextualize and perhaps find yet a new motivation for a phrase that you hadn't thought of before.
Yes.
The source material.
Yeah.
Although you are just at the peak of your career, do you see teaching in master classes in your future as something you'd like to do?
Oh, most definitely. Our profession, and not everybody wants to do it, but I believe it's important that oral tradition and oral traditions are passed down, and that's something that I think that we're losing in the art form. That you don't, and as much as I can, I've been actually very generous along the way, wherever I've been, and I don't mind, because that's part of this. It's part of opera. It's part of, I mean, it's been from the beginning. People have passed on. Well, you know, this is what Julia did here, you know, and also you might want to think of, if someone asks you, you know. I think it's an important part to pass knowledge on. That's, you know, that's what makes us human. You know, that's part of our social DNA, is passing on our knowledge.
And yeah, absolutely. And the fact that we, as a species, can speak enables us to do that. And pass along the wisdom of how to survive in the forest or how to sing a great Wotan. Well, you know, you are singing the Ring Cycle through May at the Met. What's your summer?
I'm Bayreuth. I'm back in Bayreuth. Yeah.
And this season doing the Tristan?
Kurwenal and Tristan.
Wow. Yeah. How fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you get to see through this conversation why Greer's Wotan is so multidimensional and deeply human. It's because that's who you are.
Well, is Stephen here? Stephen Wadsworth? Yeah. That man right there.
Oh, hello there. I didn't see you before.
He was so gracious and long-suffering when I was doing my first one.
In Seattle?
Yes. Stephen Wadsworth was our director, and I have to say, you know, in a public forum, Stephen, thank you so much. I owe you so much. He asked the right questions, and what the work that we did in Seattle that first summer when I tackled this role has carried me through crazy productions that we talked about. You know, with sopranos rolling their eyes at the.
I didn't see the first Ring Cycle in Seattle. I saw the second Ring Cycle in Seattle, and it was just fantastic. And I can imagine how that is your foundation of understanding the work, because it just told the story so beautifully. Yeah.
Likewise, to sort of come back full circle about technique as well. That's not possible if I'm worrying about how I'm going to sing it.
Yep.
Or if I'm not settled in it, and also if I didn't have that fabulous and wonderfully sound foundation of Stephen in that summer, I don't believe that I would have found the things along the way that I found in the role.
Well,
yeah.
We're so lucky for you. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Good luck with the rest of the Ring Cycle.
Thank
I hope you have a cool spell in Bayreuth this summer.
I do too.
Please join me in thanking Greer Grimsley. Thank you so much. It's fantastic.